Hello?
Hello?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Awesome. Greetings, lovers of lore, to this week's installment of the Whimsical Whispers podcast. I'm Original Orchid,
And I'm Vicious Venus.
and today we're going to be doing another book talk, particularly on the book The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, which we'll link in the description if you'd like to check it out, which please do so because it's an amazing book. So before we get into that, firstly, of course, as always, let's put out a few disclaimers.
So, this book, it does not belong to us. It belongs to the wonderful author, Neil Gaiman. And these are all of our opinions. They are not facts. And if you have your own opinions or thoughts on the book, please comment them down below, depending on the platform you are using.
Yeah. Without further ado, let's get to it. So, let's put this out right now. Me and Venus have not read this book we read it the first time about a year ago, correct?
Yeah,
You're right.
around September, October of 2020.
So if we do get any information wrong, please be sure to tell us, either comment or message. And of course, just as Venus mentioned earlier, if you would like to tell us what do you think, maybe you think we're right, maybe you think you're wrong, then please tell us that as well. So where we can start off. When I first read this book, I was asked by a mentor, what can we learn from conflict? And after pondering this question for a very long time based on this book, I decided that we can learn from conflict that while conflict may hurt at the moment, it can also pave the way to something better. Let me explain. In only the first 15 years of Bod's existence, he faced more conflict than most will ever face in their entire lifetimes. When he was a baby, he was targeted for slaughter and narrowly escaped death as an orphan, only to be forced to reside in a graveyard for the rest of his young life with ghosts as his only company. Yet, despite these struggles and misfortune these events brought, they also brought away. For example, due to Bod's family's unfortunate ending and his welcome into the graveyard, Bod became the first of the living to receive the freedom of the graveyard. This allowed him to see the dead and perform many of their activities, such as fading and dream walking, later helping him to defeat his killer. Thus, while the conflict clouding Bod's life may have seemed all bad, without it, he would have not received freedom of the graveyard, nor would he have received the life he lived, which nor immediately. But because of this, he was able to live as long as 15, and then later extend his lifetime after he was able to kill his killers. Tongue twister, I know. Another example from the Graveyard book that displays this is Petsuko's arrival to the graveyard. At the start when she arrived, Bod despised her at first glance, from her strict teaching style to the fact that she had temporarily replaced his beloved guardian. This, Bod and Pesco, sorry if I'm saying her name wrong by the way, please correct me, frequently quarreled about everything. And then later in the book, when Bod ran away with a group of ghouls and almost sacrificed to them in order for them to reach their destination safely, he was actually rescued by Miss Lupexu. So though the turn of events provided by this conflict, Bod learned that while the strife caused by his disagreements and distaste of Miss Lupexu might have affected him negatively earlier, she did care for him and had now saved him, which shows that while his conflict may have hurt at the beginning, it did end up being a savior to him.
Yeah, like you said before, Bod really does face a lot of conflict throughout the book, and most of these conflicts seem to be very external. He doesn't face a lot of internal conflicts. And not all conflicts are resolved, and not all conflicts prove to be better in the end.
Mm-hmm. I think in
Which
addition to that, yeah, continue.
Yeah, I guess it just kind of shows that, not all good things can come out, not every single time a good thing can come out of a bad thing. But it's fine because eventually it'll get better.
Right. And I think sometimes from that, just as he tried to remind himself the situation is temporary, sometimes, not always, you do need to remind yourself that situation and it will get better. I think the novel also taught the importance of listening to others, which I perceive to be the theme. Which, for one, when Bod was placed in the hands of Miss Lutesco as her student, he disregarded her lessons, feeling that her teachings were useless, and if they were for him, then they had no meaning. And often, Bod never realized that he was learning from his teacher's endless list that he was forced to memorize. And then later on, in that adventure I spoke of earlier, at the Ghoul Gate when he was about to be killed, he used the information Miss Lupesco had taught him to cry for help in every language in the world, and utilized the constellations and sun to figure out his exact location. Afterward, Bod realized that, whether he enjoyed it or not, listening to Miss Lupesco saved his life, which shows that if he hadn't listened to her, he wouldn't have survived the journey to the ghouls, nor would he have made his way back to the graveyard, thus proving the significance of listening to others, and as well proving that not everything needs to be fun.
Yeah, I think that was a very important lesson to learn in the story because, like, not it's like every time you're going to learn something new, it's not always going to be very fun, but sometimes it might prove to be useful to you. So, if I were you, I'd just pay attention.
Definitely. I think, in addition to prior evidence, another example demonstrating the novel's theme, or at least what I perceive to be the theme, was Bod's expedition to the Abandoner Bulgar store. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong as well. Please, please correct me once again. But despite previous warnings from both of Bod's parents, ghosts, by the way, in case you're wondering, and Silas about the dangers of venturing outside the graveyard, Bod actually ignored their advice and journeyed out to the graveyard to the Abanzer Bulgar shop to purchase a headstone for his witch friend. Yes, his parents are ghosts, and he has a witch friend.
Who is also dead.
Yep. Later on at the store, Bod is captured and locked into the bathroom of the store. Sorry,
Because
the
he was
back room.
trying to buy the headstone with a very expensive ruby, and the store people decided to keep him in and find out where he got the expensive ruby.
Exactly. Had Bod not narrowly escaped, he would have been given to Jack Frost and been killed that day.
And
Thus, by
yes,
list.
escape with the help of his ghost witch friend.
Yep. So no, witches are not just an FYI.
Yeah, and this is another important lesson to learn to listen to people, especially those who have more experience than you. And if you don't have experiences, like if you don't have your own experiences about that sort of thing, then you should probably listen to the person. Bod has never been outside the graveyard, so he doesn't know how the world is outside.
Definitely. I think I also appreciated the character development seen in this book from Bod. He, the author, kind of transformed Bod from this helpless baby that had unknowingly wandered into the grave to this independent young adult through many of his experiences throughout the novel. Namely, one of the scenarios showcasing Bod's character development were his interactions with Miss Lupesco during the novel. And yes, I know we've mentioned a lot for someone who only appears in a few chapters. But initially, Bod judged Miss Lupesco on the person he saw at first glance and refused to uncover the true Miss Lupesco, oppressing her and judging her. And then in comparison, later on in the book, Bod developed this acceptance for Miss Lupesco and learns to respect everything she does, and felt great remorse over her death, which, by the way, was to protect him, which displays how much his character grew within this period of the book, and Bod's development of his morals throughout the story. It was
I
also
think
another, yeah,
I think another way he kind of developed as a character was him being responsible, because in the beginning he kind of just did whatever he wanted to, but later on in the book he kind of learned to grow up and know how to deal with certain situations.
Right. He was quite reckless, like what we were saying earlier. He sort of deemed the lessons unuseful if they weren't fun for him.
He kind of
That's
just
very
did whatever he liked to.
right. He never really listened to anybody. He just did what he wanted because he was the only human in the graveyard.
I mean, this could also be just another matter of him like growing up and maturing naturally. It may not be character development at all because yeah, he was a really young kid. So he could have just, done all those crazy things because he was a little kid.
I disagree. There's a particular example showing that Bod really did go through character development, which is a scene where Bod actually stood up for another kid in his class. For several weeks, Bod witnessed this child in the classroom get bullied daily, yet never seemed to care about what was happening around him, feeling that it didn't affect him. So there was no need to get involved. Later in the book, however, Bod's thought process changed. He obtained a sense of sympathy, empathy perhaps, and finally stood up to his classmates against the bullies and defended him. This demonstrated Bod's character development, a clear character development, because it showed the difference and allowed the reader to get a grasp on how far Bod had come with helping others, in addition to his new sense of integrity. Likewise, I also appreciated how the author's depiction of the graveyard. Most
Yeah,
fictional story, most fictional stories describe graveyards as chilling or gloomy, but the Graveyard book took a completely different approach. This novel's graveyard is shown as a warm, supportive atmosphere where all of friends and family are, and more importantly, it's Bod's home.
yeah,
Thus, the author was
despite
able.
like there were times when like specifically in the beginning of the book, the author did depict the graveyard in this very mysterious and perhaps supernatural environment, but throughout the book the graveyard became much more of a loving home rather than a place where dead people rest. And it was nice seeing, and it was very bittersweet at the end of the book when Bod wanted to leave because he was all grown up now and he was going to go, I don't know, explore the world. It was really bittersweet because we all thought that the graveyard was really a nice home to be in.
Mhm. I also want to talk about what you were saying earlier about how it's portrayed as mysterious rather than homely. I think something that is portrayed as mysterious can still be homely.
Yeah, like throughout the book, the graveyard is still portrayed as like really mysterious, but that's honestly because there's not much we know about it. But at the same time, we still know that it's like such a nice, warm, kind place to be in, despite us not knowing a lot about what goes on in the graveyard.
Right. And due to this, I valued the author's originality surrounding the graveyard and how they could deliver the message that looks are just a shell of something's true potential. Don't judge a book by its cover, of course, as is true by this graveyard. Similarly, they also did Don't Judge a Book by its cover to the supernatural beings, the
True,
deceased.
because
They
like most of the
portrayed.
time, like ghosts are always this horror movie character, but I honestly like how the author depicted ghosts, just people who were, doing their own stuff even after they died. They were kind of frozen in time because they still talked in their mannerisms and they still behaved as the age they were when they died. But nonetheless, they were still as much human as they were when they were alive. They weren't these supernatural, evil, horrifying creatures. They were still pretty human.
Mhm. I agree. There's a lot of stuff in that book that I particularly enjoyed. However, there definitely were some things perhaps could have been changed as well in the novel. It's not saying the book was bad or anything. It's simply that nothing is perfect. So
I
even though
mean,
the Graveyard book was out, it did possess a few flaws.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one thing that really annoyed me in the book was this character named Scarlet. She was fine in
Oh,
the
yes.
beginning, but at the end of the book she really basically
I know.
basically what happened was that Bod had a plan. At the end of the book, his killers were pursuing him, and he had a plan to get rid of like the leader sort of.
Hmm.
And what he had done is he sort of used Scarlet as bait, but not really as bait because
Hmm.
he knew that she was going to survive. And his plan was successful, and the leader did die eventually. Well, not die. The leader was gone. That's all I'm going to
Hmm.
say. I don't really want to explain it. However, for some reason, Scarlet was just really shocked and horrified. And she said that Bod was just like them and said that he was a monster. And I get why she's scared. I would have been scared too, but I wouldn't have blamed Bod because he literally saved her. So I just didn't get her
Yeah.
deal.
I just
Like, she was just kind of
Scarlet.
annoying in that
But
moment.
yeah, like I understand. Nobody wants to be used as bait. Even if you know they're gonna survive. It's like this is my friend. Why did my friend put me in harm's way? But the same thing that she was blaming him for killing his killers, I thought was a bit
Um,
unrealistic. Because if he hadn't done anything, which he actually did not kill them, in case you're wondering, if he hadn't done anything, he would have been killed.
he sort of trapped them and gave them
Yeah.
like really horrible situations to be in. For
Hmm.
example, with the leader, he kind of gave the leader to another monster who kind of kept the leader in captive. It's hard to explain. You got to read the book.
Yeah. He trapped him in the chamber.
Yeah, he kept him in the chamber, and I guess Scarlet was like, "Wow, you're just like them, Bod." That really confused me because, girl, he literally saved your life.
I know. And it
I
wasn't
can
like he was doing this.
understand
Yeah,
that you're upset about being used as bait, that you were scared that this ginormous monster came out of nowhere, but Bod's not to blame.
I know. She just saw this a sense of inhumanity. And I think if he was doing this just because, it would be a sense of inhumanity. It would be complete and utter inhumanity. But he wasn't doing this to be cruel. He was doing this as a defense. Because if he didn't enact, he'd be dead.
Like, these killers were literally harming so many people, not just humans, but even supernatural beings. In fact, it was these people who killed Miss Lupescu. So, like, he was just doing a favor to everyone, and she claims that he is just as bad. And let me tell you, Bod absolutely does not care. He's just confused, but in the end, he does not care. He actually deals with it like a pro. He's
Yeah.
just so indifferent. He's just like, okay, if you think I'm worse than them, fine. I don't care.
Hmm. To me, one of the
I
main
really
subplots
gotta
of
hand
the.
it to Bod for that.
I know, he was very mature in that sense. Though it wasn't exactly he didn't care, which is coming to what I was saying as the main setback of the novel, in my opinion, which was the way Bod and Scarlet's friendship ended. Like Venus said throughout the novel, Scarlet was Bod's only living friend since the age of 5. The two of them shared a very close bond, and for this reason, it was, to say the least, when the friendship came to an end after Scarlet questioned Bod's integrity after indirectly killing Jack Frost. And then after that, Bod and Scarlet argued. Bod was like, "What do you want me to do?" And she was just so scared that this person she had known her entire life had become a beast in her eyes. He had become someone with no sense of integrity, no sense of humanity. And then
And it
after
was
they
really
argued,
bad because he was just trying to protect himself.
right? But then after they argued, Silas, who is Bod's guardian, wiped all of Scarlet's memories with Bod without asking Bod. He was just like, "We gotta do this now, we gotta do this," which I understand. She might have told other people. It wouldn't have been good for them. I understand. but without saying anything, without trying to reason with her, because this was his only friend. Silas wiped Scarlett's memories and used it to convince Scarlett's mother to move the family back to their former residence, throwing aside any hopes readers had of any hope of a reconciliation.
Yeah, their friendship had completely ended, and I was sad because that was like Bod's only human friend, and I was also glad because she turned out to be a really bad person.
I don't think
Not
she's
like
a
a
bad.
really bad person, but like just a little confused.
Uh,
Because I did not agree with her reaction to everything that happened.
in my opinion, a person makes a bad decision, they become a bad person. To be honest, I
Yeah,
don't
same.
really. To be honest, I really don't align myself with the idea of a bad person because there is no bad person. Just a bad,
But now
just a good
Scarlett's gonna have
person
like
has
a
seen bad
bad
things.
view of Bod, so it's like,
Right.
why have them together anymore? Why keep them
Mm-hmm.
friends? She's gonna see him as a monster now, so.
And in that sense, Bob showed some sense of maturity. Also showing some maturity in the way that he was willing to leave his home, which to me was quite bittersweet when he decided to leave. However, and at the time, I really, really disliked his decision. But now, almost a year, if not over a year after I've read the book, I realize as we speak, it was a sense of maturity. Because sometimes we can't stay where we were. We can't stay where we are because it'll only hold us back. If Bod had stayed at the graveyard, he wouldn't have quenched his thirst for knowledge. He wouldn't have met all these people. He wouldn't have done all these amazing things he can do while he's alive. It would have all come to an end.
And
Whereas,
honestly, it would just make no sense for him to stay in the graveyard because as he was growing older, he was losing his abilities to do fading and dream walking, and sometimes he wasn't even able to see the ghosts. So if he had continued to stay, there would have been no point for him.
more
It
than
was
that,
best he moved out.
yeah, more than that, he was able to do things he had always dreamed about but never could do. And the way he was able to gain all this courage to leave is an incredible sign of what he was prior.
And he was like only 15. Most of us are gonna
Mm-hmm.
move out of our homes when we're like 18 or 19. He was only
Right.
15.
And even then, when it still is very hard. This guy, it was hard for him as well, but he was able to overcome it, which is, if you ever moved out, very, very hard.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I did admire about Bod is like, I don't know, he just grew up really fast. He went from this
Mm-hmm.
reckless, I don't really care about what you're gonna say kid to this, I don't know, I'll take responsibility person.
Mm-hmm. And like we were saying, his knowing that he had to leave. I think this book also covers the difference of living and feeling alive. When you're living, you are just a regular breathing human being who is living, whereas just feeling alive is just you're doing
It's
everything
actually like,
possible.
yeah, it's like doing stuff. You're not
Mm-hmm.
just breathing, you're, I don't know, running out of breath because you've been doing so many things.
Right, you're living your life to the fullest. And that was his drive to experience feeling alive.
He didn't want to just be living, he wanted to live.
One of these instances showcasing this was Bod's reasoning to attend school. To begin, the risks Bod faced if he were to step out of the protection of the graveyard were endless, including the possibility of raising suspicions about him in town, the man who sought to kill Bod finding his location, and more. Although Bod was afraid, he was willing to take these risks for one reason and one reason only. his unquenchable thirst to understand what it means to be alive. Bod even goes as far as to beg Silas to allow him to go to school by telling him to feel alive again. And life means nothing without taking risks. Once at school, things didn't go the way Bod was expecting. When trying to experience feeling alive through making friends at school, he encountered a group of bullies who continued to terrorize him daily. Eventually, more and more went wrong, and Bod refused to leave the school until he understood what it meant to be a living, instead of being a living, breathing human, to understand what it meant to feel alive. He was able to stick up for his peers. He was able to stick up to these bullies. He was able to make sure it didn't faze him. Not for
I mean,
anything,
to be honest,
except
the
to feel
bullies
alive.
never really targeted him until like he kind
He
of
stood up for
yeah,
somebody
until he
else.
stood out. But even then, he didn't stop. He didn't decide, okay, now it's time for me to go back to the graveyard because he still wanted that experience. I mean, it wasn't a good experience, but it was an experience nonetheless.
Hmm. And you can't really have those great experiences, have those bad experiences, because then you know what not to do,
To be honest,
what
I
to
think he
do.
had a lot of fun scaring his bullies, so.
I think he had a lot of fun as well. Another was this was his decision to leave the graveyard, like we were saying earlier, but in more depth now. So after defeating the man Jack, which was another word for his killers, thus freeing the graveyard's Law decided it was time for him to leave the graveyard to experience genuinely being alive, feeling alive, despite the graveyard being the place he grew up and the place where all his family and friends resided, which showed once again his character motivation because it shows that Bod's drive to experience the feeling of being alive surpassed anything else. It showed that he was willing to take these risks in order to feel alive, because a life is no life without that thrill seeking through bones.
Yeah. Another thing that I just didn't get was the ghosts deciding to name him Nobody. His real name is Nobody. Everybody just calls him Bod. And that just. It was a little confusing to me because, I mean, I get that you want his name to be really original, but Nobody is a bit much.
Well, they wanted him to be nobody, to be this nobody, so that he wouldn't be sought out, right? Nobody is here, like that.
That's, I mean, that's camouflage.
Camouflage from your name.
Camouflaging your name is like the man Jack comes back to the graveyard, hears the ghost talking. Oh, did you see what Nobody did?
Hmm.
Huh, there's nobody here. Looks like I'll just move on.
Actually, that reminds in the Odyssey, Odysseus actually told Polyphemus that his name is Nobody because whenever
He doesn't want to get caught, and then like
right,
when yeah, when he blinds the Cyclops, and then Cyclops calls for help, and then the other Cyclopses come and they're like, "What happened?" And the Cyclops says, "Nobody blinded me,"
right, because then
and then they
Cyclops
were all
asked,
confused.
yeah, because the Cyclops asked Odysseus his name, and he said Nobody. So he was like, nobody blinded me, nobody hurt me. And everyone was just so, what on earth? So that really reminded me, because they basically have the same motive here as well, which leads me to think maybe the author, Neil, maybe wanted to tie that up, give us a Greek mythology reference. I don't know.
Perhaps.
Perhaps. Conspiracy
I mean, to be
theory.
honest, Nobody is not that bad of a name.
It isn't. Nobody Owens.
It's not that bad.
It isn't. It's pronounceable.
Yeah.
Inside joke, guys. Long story. But so is that all we have for today?
Yeah, I think so.
In that case, awesome. So, thank you, lovers of lore, for joining into this week's installment of the Whimsical Whispers podcast. And we'll hope you come for next week.
Bye.
Adios.